The world is changing extremely fast right now in ways that can feel both exciting and overwhelming. So, how do we find balance in all of this? I'm Stephanie von Bismarck, activist, author, and digital educator. Welcome to my podcast, where each week I sit down with some of the world's best thinkers, trailblazers, and extraordinary people to find ways to help us all thrive and answer the big question, how do we manage? So this is the show where we explore the balancing acts between modern life, career, caregiving, creativity, and everything in between. Today, I'm joined by someone who has navigated all of that with real insight, journalist, editor, and author Dolly Jones. Her new book, Leaving the Ladder Down, is a guide, a comfort, and a rallying cry for women trying to balance ambition and motherhood in a world that doesn't always make it easy for us. We're going to talk about returning to work after having children, and what support really looks like, and how we can lift others as we climb. Dolly Jones.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And talking about, well, your book, but, all the reasons behind why you wrote it, Leaving the Ladder Down, returning to work after becoming a parent or a mother, right?
That's right.
But before we start all of this, tell me a little bit about yourself and your career.
So I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I liked writing. So I wrote to every magazine and newspaper in the land to try and get work experience.
Yeah.
And I ended up hearing back from Vogue first. And they ran a work experience program that you could go in for 3 weeks at a time. I was terrified. I knew nothing about fashion. I had massive imposter syndrome. So I got in really early every morning and stayed really late every night, doing things like, I literally cleaned out the fridge. I was, it was not glamorous. And because I went in early and stayed late every night, they said you can stay for 6 months. So I didn't quite clean out the fridge for 6 months, but it wasn't much more glamorous than that. And in fact, I ran the work experience program for them for that 6 month kind of internship.
Okay.
And then they said, we've got this website thing happening in the cellar. And it was 1998. Yeah, it was like really, in Hanover Square, the bottom of Vogue House, a place I didn't know existed. And they said, do you want to go and try it, this internet thing? And it was 1998. And my boss, who was then editor of Vogue.com, used to say that the internet was a place for tech geeks and porn addicts, and that was the kind of environment that we were trying to push fashion into. And she was very intelligent, and she could just see the potential for fashion on the internet. But everyone else was like, what? Of course not. And no fashion designers wanted us to put their stuff on the website. Nobody wanted association with digital. But what they did want was association with Vogue. So the more content we created, and eventually, unbelievably, we didn't have this at the beginning, but eventually we started to see the traffic and the data of the people on the website and what kind of people were there and how many and what they were looking at. And so once we could feed that back to the fashion designers, they became more friendly about perhaps letting us into fashion shows and interview them and what have you. So then we worked our way up the building, and eventually we were on the 5th floor with the whole Vogue editorial team. And I ran the team, the digital team and the social media platforms and all of the content on Vogue.com for about 15 years. I had 2 children while I was there, and I was promoted while I was pregnant with the second child to help run all of the Condé Nast titles digital operations.
That is very unusual, and this is what we're going to talk about
a little bit.
Yeah,
I think it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I got lucky. And so why did that happen, and what were the people around me that allowed that to happen?
How was it when you grew up? How did motherhood look like to you then versus now?
My mother didn't have a professional job. She wasn't employed. But it's such an interesting, because if you unpick that, it can be so black and white. Do you work or don't you work? There are 5 of us, for example. I'm one of 5 siblings. And she was a huge part of my father's career. Mm-hmm. He was a land agent. She was always going to events with him and, basically chatting up clients. And generally, he was, they were a partnership for his job. Not that she was ever paid or formally recognized. So his work was a huge part of her life. And she was making the curtains and laying the carpets and doing all the garden and, making our clothes when we were really young as well. So to say she didn't work is a complete and utter,
I think to say of a mother she doesn't work in general is a little bit of a tricky one, because most mothers I know work like hell. I mean, unless there are a few, very privileged, God knows what, they don't do much. But otherwise,
yeah.
Most
I mean, I think I put
work.
in the book, if you show me a woman with a child who isn't working, it's idiosyncratic. You're working. If you're responsible for another human being, then you're working. If you did it in somebody else's house, you'd be paid for it. But if you do it in your own, apparently it's not working. So
I
it's
know.
crazy.
There's also these calculations, right? What if you put it into a salary, what a mother at home is doing, and then probably looking at your mother, then even adding to her husband's job, what that would actually mean salary-wise, and it's pretty expensive.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And in fact, when we were in lockdown and I had the book deal but wasn't getting time to write, homeschooling both the children, trying to keep us all sort of mentally well and physically well. And I was feeling depressed because I wasn't earning money. And for me, I was so used to earning a salary and the validation of that and the kind of, I didn't really feel complete. And my husband said to me at one point, which makes him sound like a saint, so some days, more than others. But he said, why don't you mentally tot up in your head what you would be earning if you were doing this job, looking after our kids, for someone else? So every time you bath them, give yourself 25 quid. Every time you cook supper, give yourself 25 quid. And at the end of the day, think, if I had been doing that for somebody else's family, I would have earned X. And it was quite a nice little exercise in self-validation.
That's true. That's actually a really good exercise.
Yeah.
Did you always want to have kids? You knew that?
I just assumed I would. It was weird when I became conscious of that. Like, when did I actually decide I wanted to? I didn't decide I wanted to. I just assumed. And as I grew older and I got closer to that time of my life and I came across people who were going through infertility journeys and experiences, which for me didn't happen, but I suddenly thought, oh my God, maybe it won't happen. That was one kind of light bulb moment. And then another light bulb moment was meeting people who absolutely didn't want children and never even thought about it and felt much richer and more fulfilled without, thank you very much. And I was like, oh God, it was a choice. And so when I wrote the book, I wanted to talk to women of every experience. So in there are women who decided not to have children, women who tried to have children and ended up not, to just really validate the whole experience and why we decide to live the way we do, because actually there are choices at every moment. It's not just, a linear path. No,
and you just have to, sometimes those choices come along, or sometimes choices are made for you.
Yeah. And it can be, some really, really sad occasions or experiences in the book have eventually led to opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have come as a result of something you didn't plan or you didn't want to happen.
And how did becoming a parent change your view of yourself and also your career?
Well, I hated when I was pregnant being told, oh, you'll have a different attitude. Oh, when you have a baby, so many people said that, oh, you'll change once you have a baby. And I found it so patronizing. I loved working. I worked, it was online, so I could work, it felt 24/7. It was incredibly exciting. Fashion, having known nothing about it, the sense of imposter syndrome never really left me.
Yeah.
So that kept me quite hungry and really, really working hard. And, when you work on a digital publication, you can see the traffic coming in, you can really read the audience and shape the publication accordingly. So it was just really, I was very, very driven. And I expected to be completely the same when I came back. And I was to a degree. I didn't feel any different. We had quite a big team then, so I could rely on other people to step in where I did need to be at home. And I felt very fueled by the combination of working both jobs, the parent job and the professional job. And I started to be aware of how much people assumed it would go badly. How much of the kind of narrative of it's impossibly difficult to maintain your career, certainly the trajectory I might have felt I was on, how the government gives us no support, how it's easy for men and it's impossible for women, how it detrimentally affects your relationships, your children's mental health, your own mental health, all this negative, all of which is true. These challenges are, systemic change is absolutely essential and we need to keep fighting it.
Yeah.
What I didn't hear of is this kind of euphoria when it goes well, when you feel that the children are safe and happy, you're going and you're having a good day at work, the sun is shining, your tube arrived on time, you like what you're wearing that day.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is epic. This is absolutely amazing. Nobody tells you about this. And those moments may not happen every day, but they do happen enough to talk about. And you'd see other working women, working parents on the tube, say, and you'd know because they were carrying some sort of cartoon rucksack, or they had some sort of bit of food on them, or, the tiny little bits of evidence that there was more to their life than just their professional identity. And you'd want to high five them because it's like, this is amazing. We are doing it. And I wanted to capture that for the book, because while the systemic change we need to all fight for and keep pushing, sometimes the negative narrative puts other people off. I wanted to galvanize other women, not say that they have to do it, they should do it, but just say that women are doing it, and this is how. And it's joyful, and it's doable. And when I interviewed, more than 200 women for the book, from every profession you could think of, from taxi drivers to pilots, actresses, medics, lawyers, everybody I could think of, what poured forth from them when I interviewed them was the sense of triumph, the pride in themselves. And, there are discussions about very, very difficult employment situations, very difficult health situations. There are challenges throughout the book, but every single woman I spoke to was proud of what she'd done, how she'd achieved it, how she'd found her way of doing it. And that was what I was trying to capture, because when I was trying to find books to read when I first did it, it had a negative slant. It sort of told me to expect the worst. Yeah. And that it didn't galvanize me. It made me just kind of think this isn't worth trying.
How did you organize your life when you just went back to work? How did that work?
So, I thought I wanted to send the children to nursery. I'd heard really good things about nursery because of the socialization of the children. And just generally, one woman said to me that her children were at nursery and she was a lawyer and her husband was a policeman. And they needed watertight care, 363 days of the year sort of thing, because they couldn't be flexible with it. But I went to, for me personally, I went to look at nurseries really early on because I wanted to get back to work as soon as I could. And I was still breastfeeding. And for me, not for everybody, for me, I was very, very conscious of my hormones, and it made me feel like I was just going to basically desert the child. And I saw this nursery with a sort of dorm of cots where they would put them for their naps in the afternoon. And I just cried. I just had to leave. I couldn't go with it at all. And then some weeks later, I'd stopped breastfeeding by then, and I started to interview nannies. And so we decided to do the nanny thing. We were both earning. That meant that our combined salary meant we could afford that. And for us, that worked for a period of time. When the children were a bit older, they did go to nursery. But it was, in fact, we had various nannies and things went really, really well. And then at a certain point, our childcare thing set up started to fall apart. One nanny left, and then various other people came in and weren't suited to us or whatever. And it was that anxiety of going to work and not having watertight childcare at home, not being 100% sure that everything was safe and happy. They were safe, but not necessarily everybody wasn't happy. And that's when I started to think I've got to look at doing this a different way, because the childcare is absolutely the key thing.
I think it's really important. I had this conversation with a guest on the show who said, she had 3 little children, and she just was struggling so much, and she just couldn't do it. One of them being twins. And she then said they didn't have really the money, but they put all their savings into help because she would have just collapsed otherwise. So this notion, I think it's so important to put out there, this, in the earlier days, there was much more of a community, where in certain other cultures, there's much more of a community where women after childbirth, for example, are not even allowed to do anything. Yeah. They're not allowed to cook. They're not allowed to do anything. So we have sort of deserted that in our Western cultures. But really, we cannot do it alone. Whether it was the grandma or the aunt or the neighbors or however, or the nanny in this case, I think one important thing is to say you need help, however that helps looks like, right? Because doing it alone is a little bit of a tough one.
Absolutely it is. But I think it's quite difficult to ask for help. The whole experience I felt, with hindsight, I think it carries a lot of shame. You don't necessarily don't want to admit that you're not doing it well. You might not want to admit that you don't really enjoy maternity leave. It's lonely because we don't live in the same community as we used to in more ancient times. that's lonely. There's a friend of mine talks about, the whir of the washing machine when you're on maternity leave. It's like, it's so lonely. That's the only noise in the house when the baby's asleep, obviously. But I think also to be able to admit to, or to just ask questions, how did you find maternity leave, without everyone just saying, oh my God, it's beautiful. Oh God, I was loving it. I was with my baby and it was just so wonderful. Quite a lot of the time you don't. You feel broken and isolated. But also, I would like to see that approach of open conversation be applied to work as well, because perhaps, the woman you were talking about who had the twins, and the financial situation of childcare is so massive. I wonder whether she could say that to her boss. Not that her boss could have given her extra money for the childcare, but the challenges of being a working parent aren't necessarily talked about at work, because being a working parent itself is sort of shameful. You don't want to talk to your work people, your colleagues or your bosses about the fact that you have this other priority at home, because it makes you seem less professional. And so you have to put on this front of complete and utter professional, complete and utter dedication to your work. And actually, we should all be able to talk about all aspects of our life at work. And even if financially your workplace can't help you, they can support you emotionally. They can treat you with respect and compassion if you need to come in late because
it's a lot about culture, right?
Absolutely.
And you have different countries, different cultures, but obviously also different companies, different cultures.
Yeah.
How were you supported from your employer at the time when you went back to work?
It was interesting. I mean, Vogue, it was a run by women for women. But what was very apparent to me was that no one talked about their kids. Perhaps they did, but I didn't experience it. I didn't feel comfortable talking about mine. I felt like I needed to really lean into the professional profile, professional identity, to show that my priorities were not now split between the two lives. And there were people there who had children, and I didn't really know how many or who they were. It wasn't a sort of prevalent conversation. When I first realized I was pregnant, I emailed the MD of Condé Nast and said, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry this is going to be so inconvenient. And he wrote back and said, no, it's absolutely wonderful. It's a very important thing to do. Please don't apologize. Thank God.
Yes.
And thank him. It was great. But that speaks to how I was feeling, that it was kind of the wrong thing to be doing. And it was an interesting time. Alexandra Schulman was my editor at the time. She has a son. She had a very short maternity leave, 4 months or something, I think. She felt pressured to come back. She had the editor of Vogue job. It's a mega job. Financially, she was the breadwinner, so that was an absolute necessity. And she is and was hugely, she's a girl's girl. My mum would use that expression. She's, many female friends, and there's sort of, I remember sending her a picture of my son when he was, a few days old, and she just wrote back. She was famous for her one-word emails, and she just wrote back the word delicious. She was really kind of gooey about babies. But she was also writing articles in the mainstream press at the time saying that maternity leave is of great inconvenience to businesses. And one article she wrote in the Times a couple of months after I came back, I think after having had my daughter, and it said something like, women expect their jobs to be preserved in aspic, and they shouldn't expect anything like that. And working part-time doesn't mean making snowflakes with your 4-year-old at the kitchen table when everyone else at work is stressing over something.
This is so wrong. There's so much wrong about this.
It was difficult to read, and I put in the book that it was difficult to read. And Alex was brilliant. She contributed to the book, and she allowed me to speak to her about her, why she'd made the decision to write those articles. And she's written recently about my book in her Mail on Sunday column, and she said that this book will help other women who are going through the experience of combining the two jobs. But she maintains her point, one of her points, which was that women shouldn't expect to come back into the workplace they left a year ago and find exactly the same job. And I would argue that women don't do that. I mean, certainly I took 5 months off, I think the first time, and 7 the second time, or the other way around, I can't remember now. But I didn't expect things to be exactly the same. Of course not. The business moves on. I'd been away, whether you've been away 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, of course you would expect the business to be different. It's about having easy and curious and open conversations about, right, okay, what what's happening now? What do we need to be doing? What are we trying to achieve? How have the goals changed? How has the team changed shape? You expect, I think legally you go back and you expect the same salary if you're working the same hours.
Yeah.
But if you're not working the same hours, you don't expect the same salary. Nobody assumes to settle back into position and kind of drift. And certainly countless women have told me how much more ambitious, how much more driven they felt, and how much more efficient they felt having had the children, because your life is so busy you can't afford to waste time.
No.
And I certainly felt like that. I was so driven and fueled by the success of it, fueled by, as I say, those moments of euphoria where you think, my God, this can work.
But for example, I know, okay, and they would probably never say that in public because it's very, not correct to say it, but I know a lot of, let's call them just employers, who would tell you, they're not even looking at women who apply for certain jobs in a certain age range, just because they fear that they will become pregnant and then leave. So, and there's so much fear around everything. Fear from you as a woman not speaking up. You have countless women I know who have been hiding when they were pregnant, who didn't speak up, which in the end doesn't contribute to anything good because the company is then confronted with something. This is the last moment. But in all these stories and all these people you talk to, what do you think could really change? So what do we really need to do in order to change our perspective and our attitude and what we can actually offer, that becomes less?
The assumption is that life is so black and white. You either work or you don't work. You either come back after having a baby or you don't come back after having a baby. And it's to dispel all assumptions. It's to replace the shame with triumph. Let's focus on the achievement of this. It's a mega achievement. Somebody said the other day, I didn't realize when I worked with a woman who had children before I had children, this woman, her boss would get to her desk and she'd say, oh, God, I can have a break now, 3 children in school and I've done breakfast and everything. And, I feel like I've run a marathon. And we were talking about the fact that what if she had run a marathon? Everyone would be going, my God, you're amazing. How did you run a marathon before you went to work? How did you handle the nutrition of that? How do you sleep well? What do you wear? You're so incredible. Actually, she has run a marathon mentally, emotionally, on practical terms, but somehow we consider her therefore less able to do her job.
Yeah.
But so I think we need to take away the shame, focus on the triumph, and then talk about it openly. So the managing director of a financial, she was a banker, and now she runs a financial PR company. And she got in touch with me via LinkedIn recently and said, I read your book and, I'd love to talk about it. So we met, and she was talking about a colleague who had recently gone on maternity leave to have her second baby. And she'd gifted my book to this colleague of hers going off. And when the colleague had read the book, she got in touch with her boss and they set up a call. And the boss said to her, how do you feel having read the book? And she said, I feel quite emotional because I feel that I have sidelined my career to have this baby. And I feel that I have done myself a disservice. Because I didn't tell you before I went on maternity leave that I really wanted to put myself up for promotion. I feel hugely ambitious still, but I felt like I was going to give you mixed messages saying I was ambitious and I wanted to be promoted, but also having a baby didn't make sense. Anyway, they then had this very open discussion about ambition and the state of their business and what could be done. And as a result of it, the colleague was put up for promotion and, she's going to come back from maternity leave in this new role. And it's exactly why I wrote the book. So people can have these conversations. You might not necessarily want a promotion, but you could talk to your boss about, before you go, what you think you might like or what might work for you. The boss can say what they need within the business and what they foresee for the business happening in the next few months. And then once the baby's born, once you've decided when you're coming back, just people need to not be frightened. And I think we are frightened of having these conversations openly. Certainly, I felt that HR wasn't allowed to talk to me about it because in case they said something that made me feel I could sue them for, doing the wrong thing. Everyone's kind of caught in this bind of don't speak about it, don't speak about it. So nobody's just, people have babies. It's natural. And if they don't, then we're going to be in real trouble.
Yeah, and we have to have this discussion because our society is having less babies and we need children into our society to be born. How is this going to happen magically?
Yeah.
Out of AI or something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, God.
Yeah, no, I'm putting this as on purpose a little brutal, but how is this going to work?
Yeah. And often companies, there's a funny woman in the book who says, I was, made redundant as I was, I'd been trained, all of the investment in me into this company, and I was trained up, and then I was made redundant when I had my baby. And they were creating product for women, and they had less and less women working in that company the higher you went up. And it's like, if you want to know how to create product for women, you need women in the room when you're talking about it. So to your point about people not employing women of that age, increasingly we see all these studies about how diversity in the workplace creates more successful business. You need every box ticked in terms of different people, because you're selling to all of these different customers. And so, I say in the book, when I talk about Alexandra Schulman's articles, she talks about pregnancy being an inconvenience in the workplace, which it can be. I mean, I was pretty uncomfortable when I was pregnant. It was inconvenient in lots of ways. But if you focus on that point only when it comes to maternity in the workplace, there's one answer to the problem, and it's male. You don't employ any women. And then where do we go with that? I mean, that's just not going to be a sustainable or a feasible choice for successful business.
Very unlikely. I mean, there are certain countries that do a lot better job. I'm half Swedish, so the Swedish culture is far more promoting a lot of women. Most of my female friends work, but the entire system is also very different. It's normal to take maternity leave. It's normal for the dad to take paternity leave, or you can even transfer it to other family members if wanted and needed. It's it's okay to leave earlier if something happens, as long as you get the work done. So all these things are very, very possible. I think Holland is quite a good example too, the Netherlands. Germany is not a good example because it's really not female friendly for mothers. But there is a lot that has to change in that area.
Yeah. There's a woman in the book who was an army officer.
Yeah.
And she had a little boy of about 18 months old, and then she had twin boys. Her husband was in Afghanistan at war. She was at home. She was running, I can't quite remember the job, but she was based at Sandhurst, I think, and she was running a huge company of men. She was starving herself to get herself back into her uniform, because she'd had to take quite a lot of time off before she had the twins, because she was too huge to really feel comfortable doing the job. And one of her twins kept being really, really unwell and rushing him to hospital in the night. So, I mean, the stress was just like unfathomable and unfeasible. And she left the army, having had years of training, a hugely successful career. And she says now, I mean, she was incredible when I interviewed her. I don't know her. I was introduced by a friend of a friend of a friend, and we were on Zoom during lockdown having this interview. And she was sobbing as she was telling me about this experience. And I said, let's stop. Why don't we, do you want to take a break? And it was sweet, because her husband sort of came around the camera and said, "No, don't worry, I'm here. I'm just making her a cup of tea." And he said, "I think it sounds like it's really helping her. Please keep going." And she said, I think I'm just crying so much. I've never talked about it. I've never really talked about it. And actually now I'm talking about it, I feel like I've had PTSD since that time." And she said now, when we sort of had the tea and everybody calmed down, and she said, "I wish I'd talked to the army. I wish I'd said to them, you've invested in me so much. I'm so ambitious for this job, but I need 9 months to a year to just get myself in shape physically, mentally, make sure I'm happy with the childcare. If you can just give me that time, I'll be back, fighting, literally." And I think, and she regrets that she didn't do that. She left the army after all that time and that training and that investment. And that conversation shouldn't be unusual. If somebody had a terrible car accident, your place of work would say, hopefully, some places of work would say, "What do you need when you come back? You're
Absolutely.
presumably still recovering. You're well enough to work, but do you need physical,
therapy?
Physical therapies, or do you need a different desk, or what would help you?" And in this time of recovery, great to have you back, but there will be other things going on for you. But somehow with maternity, even though people have sometimes had, horrifically traumatic births, but it's not even discussed. It's considered private, and maybe it's overstepping to ask. But I think there must be some way of constructing a safe conversation about what the needs might be in order to get people back into the workplace and up and running when they're ready.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to emphasize, because that conversation early on and openly, without fearing that you're going to lose your job right away or something, because that's what then happens, right? with maternity leave, they sometimes fear, okay, so now she's going to have a baby. Then who knows how long she's going to be out. And we're going to have to pay how long she's going to be away for. And then we have to like try and bridge that gap whilst she's not here. And then what happens? She comes back for 2 days or 5 days, and then she's having another baby. So sometimes they don't see, how long this is going to take, which is also unfair to a company. And I understand that. So I guess if I understand you right, it would be so much more important to have these conversations early on, right away, and make the women fearless to speak about what's going to happen, and then really come up with a good plan for everyone to be planning accordingly.
Yeah, it's not black and white. So you're not coming back in exactly the same way that you were here before. Well, therefore, you just have to leave. Well, hang on. Let's look at this. It's not that doesn't make you unemployable, that you can't work in the same way. Of course, we can't pay you the same for working less hours.
Yeah.
But we need to unpick each individual circumstance is unique. So we need to unpick, what can you contribute? You can't contribute in the same way. What can you contribute? How can we make this work? Because actually we don't want to lose the investment that we have, put into you and trained you in your experience. You can help us train other people. But it's, there's this sort of blanket of silence. And I think part of it is women are caught in this bind of feeling like if you work, you're not parenting well. And if you parent, you're not working well. And again, it's black and white. It's one or the other. And there are so many different ways of working. And there are examples in the book of one example of a woman who's set up a greeting card company. Rosie Made a Thing. They're really funny little cards, brilliantly funny. And she works only with mothers, and they're all completely flexible. And even where they work is easy. It's within close enough to the village school where most of their kids go, and it's all just such an open conversation about what the parameters are of their working possibilities during the day. And she says these women that she has working for her are so motivated and so loyal because they're able to enjoy their working life alongside their parenting life. And it makes people happy, and happy people work better. And I'm happier when I'm working. I don't want to be off just doing the one job. I'm better when I'm kind of being able to combine the two. And I'm better at both because I'm happier.
I think also a happy mom is a better mom.
Yeah.
Whatever it takes to have her happy.
Yeah.
But you were just mentioning, and the shame and the guilt. Because if you go to work, you think you're a bad mom, or even society tells you you're a bad mom.
Yeah.
If you're at home, you think you're useless, none of which is, of course, true. So in all these experiences with women, what sort of stood out, and how that these women, including yourself, handle shame and the guilt that you have?
Well, it's an interesting one. There's an entire chapter dedicated to guilt, which I didn't want to do because it's like, no, I'm not going to lean into that stereotype. But the thing is, when you say to, any of the women I spoke to, and they were like, oh my God, the guilt, the moment you mentioned guilt, it's like, okay, we need to work out what this is, where this comes from. Some women said, I didn't feel guilty. I had to earn the money. So of course I didn't feel guilty. But maybe that makes me a bad person. So then they felt guilty for not even feeling guilty. It was just so complicated. But when you go back, into sort of classical times, which are quoted in the book as well, women working was fundamentally counterculture. So it's so embedded in us that the guilt doesn't necessarily come from the here and now. It comes from what we've been taught, what we've kind of, by osmosis inherited. Exactly. So it's definitely there. There are guilt avoidance strategies in the book that some people have used. There are, for me, it's just a case of saying, I feel there I am feeling guilty again, and trying to focus on the good things I've done. So a therapist said to me once, when you go to bed at night, when you're beating yourself up, just try and tell yourself 5 things you've achieved well that day, whether it's made your child laugh, whether it's cooked something successfully, you liked your outfit that day, really, really small things. You didn't necessarily change the world. And it just helps you kind of build yourself up against this kind of constant inner critic that we have, that for some reason we're getting everything wrong. But the way your workplace may treat you, that feeds the guilt. The way your mother-in-law might treat you, that feeds the guilt. There are so many assumptions about how we should be living our lives that if you're not towing the line or towing everybody else's line, you somehow tell yourself you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. I remember someone telling me many, many moons ago, and that sort of stuck with me. It's like, you can have or be everything, just not and everything at once.
At once, exactly.
Anything is possible, just not all simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who's, who told me she wanted to work, and it made her just happier. And she said, "Listen, this is what makes me happy. I need to do this because we need to earn money, and I am making this decision. Just I know that I'm gonna see my kids late in the day." But I everything up until then is well organized. I'm better for it. Yes, I wasn't there during those hours, but that's okay. This is the decision I made for my life. And I'm still standing up for my family because I'm contributing in other ways. It's just something, decisions you have to learn to live with the consequences.
Yeah, and you can change your mind. You can
Also
always
that, yeah.
change your mind. That was the key thing for me when I was first going back. Again, my husband was being a saint again that day, and he said, when I was worrying about it, look, try it. This is what you said you wanted to do. If it's terrible, we can change our mind. You can change your mind. Don't go back feeling locked into it forever. But also, I think there's a great example of my daughter kind of gave me a lesson. She was about 4 and she was at nursery, and they gave her a questionnaire, and she couldn't read and she couldn't write, obviously, because she was 4. So they read her the questions and they wrote down her answers. And I was full-time working mum and feeling, quite a lot of guilt at the time. And anyway, so it was just all mortifying. And what's your favorite toy? An iPad. What's your favorite food? Pizza. And then they said, question 7, what does mummy, tell me something mummy always says to you. And I thought, I love you. And she said, and I read, you can talk to me when I finished my call. I just died a million times. But I was talking to her the other day. Firstly, I have Julia Samuel, the psychotherapist in the book, and she talks about the power of repair. And as adults, as parents, as long as we can face up to the mistakes we've made and apologize and allow our children to voice their irritation or frustration with us, then that's a hugely healing experience for everybody. So I said to my now 10-year-old daughter the other day, look, I'm sorry I said that. It must have been awful. And she said, oh, mummy, for goodness sake, I can't even remember you saying it. I was 4. I didn't have much of a memory. You probably just said it that morning because you were busy on a call, and you probably weren't even cross. And I thought, how funny, actually. I read it on that questionnaire as really unkind, slapping my poor little 4-year-old trying to chat to me away. Actually, what I might have said was, hold on a minute, darling, I'm just on this call. I'll speak to you after my call.
That just stuck with her.
And it just stuck with her. But when I read it, I read the worst possible, evil queen of a statement to a poor little child. And actually, no, it wasn't that. Of course I wasn't. I wasn't some sort of, child abusing, ignoring my 4-year-old. So we have to be careful about how we perceive what we used to do, because our intentions are good.
Yes.
All
Absolutely.
the way through. So
I had this great conversation with Tory. She's very big on social media and much about, female empowerment and motherhood. And also she told the story on the show, actually, saying how she forgot her twins' birthday celebration in school.
Oh, God.
And she got a call from the school and said, well, we're celebrating. Where are you? And she just realized, oh my God. She called her husband and they ran. Instead of sweating, came in the last second before the certificate was handed over. And she was explaining how she was full of guilt, how she was really being cruel to herself and starting this conversation with her husband. And he just looked at her and said, what do you mean? I think we're the best parents on earth. We made it on time. We're here. And then she said, and I thought it was really, greatly done. She said, from then on, she sort of talked to herself, she's going to think more like a man every now or like a dad.
Yeah.
Because somehow it's all about how you look at it. They made it.
Yeah, it's fine. Nobody died. It's there was nothing catastrophic actually there. A lot of it is the inner critic going on. I remember, in the early days of going back after our first baby, I went outside Vogue House and I rang my husband crying, saying, I just feel so guilty. I'm feeling so dreadful. I just don't know if this is the right thing. And he said, I don't understand. We've got this fantastic nanny that you're really happy with. We leave the house in the morning together to go to our jobs that are creating our life for us. Our child is happy. He said, guilt doesn't enter my head. It's so unfair that you have to carry this cultural sort of weight of guilt. I just don't feel it. I just don't. Just put it down. It's not yours. And I thought, yeah, why am I carrying this? But I think some of it, it's careful on this because I don't want to blame women for feeling it, but some of it is pressure that we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
And in the book, I talked to Gubi Aida, who's a leading gynecologist and an obstetrician in London. And she's got 3 children and she's had a fantastically amazing career. And she said that she was going for a job at one point being interviewed by a man, and she'd constructed her CV and she'd sort of she'd camouflaged her maternity leaves throughout all of her other experiences. And the man interviewing her said, look, I've just kind of worked this out. So you've got 3 kids, yeah, these is your maternity leaves. Why have you camouflaged them? It's such an achievement to have had 3 kids and 3 maternity leaves and still had this fantastic career. And she was saying to me, and he was a man. She said, the pressure to hide those maternity leaves was my own. I had, imposed that upon myself. So a bit like guilt, if we can be aware that we're doing it, we can hopefully encourage ourselves to be kinder to ourselves, because we are culturally encouraged to beat ourselves up, I think.
Yeah, I think it's probably also to be prouder to be a woman.
Yeah.
And everything it entails.
Yeah.
We're not the hard, tough, whatever guys. We're never going to be better at that. We are women, and it comes with so many beautiful things.
Yeah, and I think being the hard, tough guys probably isn't very nice for the men who feel they have to act that way, perform that way. But the working like a man thing is interesting because people are like, why? That doesn't make you a good co-worker. That doesn't make you an empathetic person. This work like a man seems like a really negative sort of cloak to wear to work. But then a couple of women said, actually, I think of working like a man to be more or completely unapologetic about, if I have to leave at 5 to collect the kids, I get up and I say, I'm going now, I'm leaving at 5. If you get up and you kind of go, oh God, sorry guys, I've got to leave, I've got to make it to school pickup, that weakens your position in a way. It's just like, just own it, celebrate it. You're amazing. Be the woman who won the marathon before she got to her desk. You are. Be proud. Focus on the triumph, not on the apology.
Speaking of the men, what role do the men play in your book?
First of all, at one point, I explore the concept of mothering. So how are the children mothered in a relationship where there are no women? So there are a couple of families with gay men together and how they sort of share out the mothering of the thing, which is of the experience, which is interesting. There is a couple in there who have adopted a child, and one of them is the more sort of practical. He's an artist, so he turns up to the school gate more often if there's an emergency pickup or whatever. But the other father is. He said, I'm kind of not more maternal, but I'm not more feminine, but I'm kind of softer. So he's the cuddly in bed. And it was amazing. They'd adopted the child and he wasn't sleeping well shortly after he arrived. And so they go back through the adoption agency who helped them sort of with all these issues. And they got in touch with the birth mother who, the child had loved, but she wasn't able to maintain her position as his mother anyway. So she told them to twist his hair as he was going to sleep in their fingers, and that would just sort of soothe him to sleep. And so they tried that and that worked. And it was sort of rather heartbreaking in so many ways, but also the fact that, their mothering was about twisting hair. It's such a sort of sweet, such a sort of nurturing thing to do. And, anybody can do that, man or woman or so that's one set of men. There are the phrase I don't like either, but house husbands. There are a few house husbands, one of whom is interviewed in the book. And he tells an interesting story about they have 3 daughters. Yeah, 3, I was going to say 2. And his experience of being, and the preconceptions people have of him as the house husband, and him having allowed his wife to really flourish in her career. And he loves it, and it's really hard work. And people have been, his parents, he felt that they were going to be a bit embarrassed about him doing it. But very quickly they came round to like, oh my God, we know how hard it is to, do the washing up all day and sort all the admin and be at school whenever you need to be and all of that. So they're proud of him and he's proud of it. But he said, I sometimes feel that I'm not really fathering them emotionally because there's always so much admin to be done. And I wish I could sort of just have more fun and be the kind of the fun dad that, other people do get to be when they're out all day, which was interestingly reflective of a woman's experience as well.
And very interesting.
Yeah. And then also Adrian Scotland, brilliant employment lawyer, is throughout the book. And he is married to a woman. They have 4 children. And she dialed back her career a bit and had part-time jobs while the children were small in order that she could dial up again once the children came of age, but he's been the main breadwinner. So I wanted men in there. In fact, Adrian, the employment lawyer, I took some of what he said and put it into the appendix of the book. And 2 people have said to me, "Why have you let a man have the last word?" And it's like, because I wasn't taking a battle stance. I was trying to talk to all of these different people with all of these different perspectives.
It's not a war.
It's not a war. And he is hugely supportive of women and of women being able to continue their careers should they wish. So yeah, men are very much part of it. And, and it's funny talking about the 50-50 marriage.
I think that's not a concept. 50-50 is just not right.
It just doesn't. You call it 50-50 and then you're actually doing 90% of everything, but just not complaining.
Yeah.
And it needs readdressing all the time as the children develop, because the role changes all the time.
Yeah.
But there are funny things. One of my favorite things is how school bags, how often prepare a child, help your child. You're supposed to help your child prepare his or her school bag before they go to school. But often I end up just doing it because it's quicker.
Like most mothers.
It's just quicker.
Unfortunately, because of time lag.
Yeah. But when my husband, occasionally when I'm really getting stressed out and just too busy, he'll say, "I'll do the school bags." And I'm like, "Oh God, I don't want him to do the school bags," because I have to check them afterwards. He's always forgotten something, the homework book or the water bottle or whatever it might be. But then so often women would say, "Oh my God, the school bags." It was such a kind of hideous factor in everyone's life. And one man had run to work that morning and couldn't find his own running rucksack. So he just emptied the kids' rucksack and stuck it on and ran to work. It's like, it's only year 1. He doesn't really need a rucksack. It's like, you absolute waster. How do you not know that this child's going to be crying and the mother's kind of gathering all the stuff and finding another bag? So, it's nice to laugh. I think it's nice to laugh. It is a very funny experience.
Yeah.
And if you can laugh as well with work, not feel, again, that sense of shame, and just say, shit, I'm sorry, it went wrong this morning. Obviously you'll work and fill in the gaps later on. But sometimes this you're doing 2 jobs, and sometimes one is going to need more than the other unexpectedly.
Yeah. I mean, your book is called Leading the Ladder Down. So who has done that for you, and how does that today look for you in its ideal version?
It's a good question. So my mother, as I say, wasn't professionally employed. Years ago, I don't know, I was at Vogue, but I was there such a long time. It was a long time ago for my birthday. She gave me some gold charms, a little selection of gold charms she'd found in an antique shop. And each of the charms represented a part of my life. There was a little gold elephant, because I spent some time in India. There was a little gold man playing bagpipes, which my dad used to play the bagpipes. There was a gold ladder, which I wear now since the book published, which is my career.
Okay.
And there was a little gold iron, which represented my mum. So slightly tongue-in-cheek, but quite telling. So she was obviously always aware that I wanted to work, and that she was encouraging, and so she was leaving the ladder down by that. And I remember I had to write an essay on feminism when I was at boarding school, and she sent me loads of articles with quotes from Margaret Thatcher in. And there was one saying that if a woman is strong, she's strident, but if a man is strong, he's something else, something much nicer than strident. And I've always remembered the word strident, that if you were successful at work, people will kind of think you're bossy and, difficult.
Yeah, that's what we always are. We're difficult somehow.
Exactly. So I think her awareness of that was very, very helpful. And I think I wrote the book because I couldn't see the ladder. I think I wanted to hand it down. I knew that women were succeeding and enjoying it and inspiring their children. There's a judge now in there, and she said, "Oh, I always felt so guilty and got so many things wrong, but 2 out of 3 of my children have gone into law, so I can't have done that badly." We are feeding our children's dreams about their own lives.
Yeah.
So I really wanted it to be a collective of women from all walks of life, and each one of their quotes is a rung for other women to read and somehow try and recognize them, elements of their own experience within it.
What do you do to manage your day in a better way? Just one thing, a ritual or something?
I've got much better at being aware when I'm stressed. When I was young, when my kids were younger, I might have snapped at them. I hate doing that. I've got much more aware of being aware of my own mood. And I breathe. You just breathe. You breathe in for 5, you hold it for 7, you breathe out for 8, and you feel better. Do that 5 times. You go to sleep, you feel better. I think breathing is, always available, and it's remarkably effective.
Breathwork is a topic out there. So you do 5 times in. Well, how?
In for 5.
In for 5.
Hold for 7.
Hold for 7.
Out for 8.
Okay, 5 times in a row.
Yeah, at least.
For everyone who's stressed out there, try that
5, 7, 8. Even my kids are like, Mummy, you need to do 5, 7, 8 breathing. They do it to each other. It's good. Get them doing it.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to try that right away. Thank you so much for coming in today. It was a fantastic conversation. Lots of success for your book.
Thank you.
So important to continue these conversations. So, let's see what's next.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.
Thank you so much to the very inspiring Dolly Jones. I hope we can all take some of Dolly's positivity for combining parenting with a career into our own lives. And if you want more of Dolly's advice, do buy her book, Leaving the Ladder Down. We'll link it in the show notes. And if you want more really inspiring conversations around parenting and working and everything in between, please hit that follow button for more episodes straight to you. Thank you for being here with me today and listening to How Do We Manage?